Okay, so we're going to talk about what the industry wants, and I wanted to start off with Andy Beale, who's Chief Engineer at BT Sport, which is hoovering up sports in a big fashion, as we know, and recently signed a big deal with the NBA and producing even more output for basketball fans, which will also feature production of games in 4K, delivering 4,000 dpi, or 4 times as much resolution as most current televisions. So really going for it. So Andy, on the training front, what are you looking for? You've expanded a lot, so you must be looking for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're still relatively new on the scene in terms of many people here, about barely 18 months old. But we have many of the same challenges, I think. And some of the biggest holes we found when we were doing the recruitment over the last 18 months, particularly in the initial tranche, was trying to find a couple of skill sets we found particularly wanting. One of those was the ever-present grey area, and the area greyness differs widely in the opinion set. People I talk to sometimes think the area grey is very wide and some think it's very small, but the area grey between traditional broadcast engineering and IT, and in fact particularly around things like server support, workflow integration, understanding how to connect things like an Avid to an EVS, and bringing in wider workflows, automation, orchestration workflows. We found it really struggled to find people of the right calibre who are capable of coming in new and delivering support and implementation for those services.
So are you running your own training?
We're just starting to look at it now. We're still very new, and we're just starting to now look at internally courses and partnerships. BT has actually started to work up its own academy, a little bit like Darren was talking about for Sky, but it's not yet launched. It's still a work in progress. But we've identified a big need in the sector for those skills.
Now, Steve Warner, you're here from the IABM. Do you feel that manufacturers should do more training?
Well, first of all, I feel like a bit of an interloper today. We primarily look at the engineering side, and I agree with Andy. We almost see our members and the staff who work for our members now fitting into 2 categories. We see those who really get traditional broadcast but don't really understand the whole IP world, network servers and the like. And then we see, perhaps, without wishing to stereotype, newer entrants into the industry who fully understand networks, IP, but they don't really understand baseband audio and video. So there is a real split now between the traditional broadcast engineer and the broadcast engineers that we need.
Is this because the training is still sort of siloed into 2 different sorts of training?
Quite possibly, yeah, but also things are just moving so quickly. Developments. I don't have a background in broadcast at all. I've only been in the sector for 4 years, but even in that 4 years, I've seen a massive change, a massive swing towards IP and broadcast over IP. As to whether the manufacturers should do more training, this is perhaps one of the reasons why we struggle to deliver training, because, as you know, traditionally manufacturers used to deliver training for free. You bought a system, you got the training. That happens less and less now. I'm still surprised at almost the reticence of the industry to invest in training. They agree we need this training, but when it comes to actually signing the check or putting your hand in your pocket,
So, Chris Miller, you're with BBC Strictly Come Dancing, camera supervisor.
Yeah.
And obviously the BBC has its own training.
Yes.
To some extent. We never know whether it's getting expanded or contracted or whatever, because there's always BBC
Well, I'm ex-BBC. I went freelance about 6 years ago. So I was trained BBC. I went straight from school at 18 into their training thing.
Is the BBC currently doing a lot of
there's the Academy. I know very little about that, I have to be honest. There's the BBC Academy. What I do know about it is that the opportunities that the BBC can offer its own academy is very narrow. I personally haven't come across a BBC Academy cameraman coming up through the ranks. I don't know if they are out there, so I can't really comment. Personally, I find training very, very difficult to achieve from my position, because every production I work with, whether it's BBC, ITV, Channel 4, they want fully trained cameramen and in every position, and the ability for me to pass on training at a lower level gets harder and harder each year, because they want to see everybody doing a job because they're paying for it. So it then becomes, I can input at the very basic level, people that are there on work experience, and I can pass it on again at a low level to our trainee assistants and our assistants. But how I pass on my camera skills, I don't know. I'm sort of locked out unless I impart it. I don't know, but I don't know where. So I'm struggling to find how which is why I got involved. I wanted to know how I could take it to the next level. When I was at the BBC, the structure there enabled me, I was surrounded by trainees. I could pass on those skills. I applaud what Sky are trying to do, but I imagine that they are training their people to cover their core business ideals, and I can't really see how that then moves further into the world that I operate in.
I mean, do you find it's the case that people of your age, if you don't mind my saying so, but there's one of the issues is that an awful lot of people over 45 are working in the highly skilled areas, and obviously Strictly Come Dancing requires highly skilled people in order for you to pummel X Factor into the ground. So, so you haven't got enough young people.
I know what you're saying, because I started on Strictly when it first started 12 years ago, and the core crew are the same. And our most junior cameraman 12 years ago is still with us, and he's now 12 years older, and there has no one has come in beneath that. So the crew has just literally gone up 12 years, and we're still doing it. I'm not saying that there aren't people out there that could fit in, but the nature of the beast is that once you get running and then the production tighten up year after year because of the core skills, they know that when the crew come in that they can cut back. They don't have to have as much rehearsal time because we all know what we're doing. If things haven't changed, once you get past that first week, it's very difficult to integrate other people into the system. And I think you'll find that in ongoing situations.
Steve, you want to?
Yeah, we have some quite frightening research that suggests a huge proportion of all broadcast engineers are within 10 years of retirement. And that's part of the perfect storm that's brewing that faces the industry, I think.
So, Mike, just to bring you in, Mike Dugdale from the Camera Crew, as an agency, Camera Crew agency, are you finding that younger people are able to do what's required, or are they just fairly basic, or what?
We actively try and bring in young people. We try very much to do that. I'm passionate about getting young people involved. There's now, everyone appears to be freelance. The companies have disintegrated, and so everybody has a financial interest. The studios in making a program, the production companies in making a program. No one is no longer really interested in, let's risk having an 18-year-old on the floor, because it's a dangerous situation. It's a factory floor. And it's just simply not in their interests. They're not looking long term.
But isn't it the case, as with all productions, as Chris was pointing out, that people we want to get the job done. We haven't got time for training.
Yes, it's exactly that. And I mean, in the Camera Crew, our crews work on the X Factor, they work on Strictly Come Dancing, Top Gear, etc., etc. Those are our crews. So I feel we're at the forefront, the top end of production. We're able to get in trainees, even in our little way. We're only 70 strong. I've got 48 cameramen and 19 assistants. And we're tiny compared with the people we've heard speak here today, the Skies and whatever. One of the only really, really successful broadcast training schemes, in my opinion, is what Chris Owen is doing at the London studios. absolutely superb, consistently somehow choosing, first of all, the right people, the right characters, and then training them with the right disciplines, sometimes slightly old-fashioned disciplines, but disciplines that have to work on a busy factory floor that we call a studio.
Okay, and John Herbert, just to come to you with Black Magic Design, you're looking for people who have, as Steve was saying, with both sets of skills, aren't you? You're looking for people with the traditional TV skills, but also the IT skills.
Absolutely. I mean, the types of products that we're now producing straddle all the breadth of industry, from basic baseband audio and video right the way through to IPTV and 4K television. What we're doing from the support section is that we're supporting engineers that are out there working on the shop floor. So we can get phone calls in, and the guys who are doing technical support have to be able to converse with these engineers. I mean, a term that's just been used now is we want old-fashioned engineers. I mean, what we're really looking for in support engineers are the way I may have come up through the industry, which is through City and Guilds, through HNC, HND, which produces engineers who are thinking. We're looking for people who are analytical, who can, unfortunately, they have a huge breadth of information to take on these days. And we, as a manufacturer, are extremely interested in training ourselves. We work closely with the local universities in Manchester, Manchester Metropolitan, Salford University, which run media technology courses.
Because you're based in the Northwest.
We're based in the Northwest, yeah. So we are very keen to get involved with those courses, to provide input and to provide some equipment for these courses, which then provides us with students that we're able to take on. As part of that program, we also are starting to offer internships to second-year students to give them a taste of the industry. We'll bring them in over their summer holiday and allow them to work with us. We pay them as a full-time member of staff. There's no real commitment on either side to work, for us later. The idea is that it's giving them some imagination into the skills that are required in technical support.
So you feel that the manufacturers ought to work more closely with the universities?
I do, yes. I mean,
it's not going to work otherwise.
I think the danger is that if the curriculum that the universities are actually making doesn't suit the employer, then you're going to create a graduate who is not really suited for employment. It is important on a degree course that there is a section, an element of intellectual study, and that prepares a student for the workplace. But I also think that core key skills, like in my industry, it would be basic electrical and electronic skills, basic IP skills. The number of students who come to us for interview who can't do a basic Ohm's law equation in their head, or something very simple like this. So it's really get the core skills in there. At the same time, we want them to have intellectual ability, because they have to diagnose on the fly via email or on the phone. They have to draw pictures in their head. All these are intellectual skills, and they also need to understand the wider working of the industry so that they can support people like system integrators or a studio engineer, so they understand what a CCU or an RCP is. So this broad breadth of information the manufacturer will try and provide, but we do need to liaise with the universities and the colleges in order to provide students who are fit for purpose.
And is BT going to be doing that sort of thing, liaising with universities?
It's part of the academy programme, which I haven't yet been involved with, but they're starting to look at partnerships. I think Ravensbourne's touted is probably the first partner, partly because of proximity and partly because of reputation. But one of the things that I wondered is that it's much easier. It's relatively easy to teach someone how to use some editing software, because you need a laptop and the software, and it's cheap and it's accessible. You can teach someone a camera, because you can do that. You can put some lights up. Teaching someone how to break a RAID array and rebuild the structure and get the spindle count right and these sorts of skills is much harder for an academic institution, because you have to have access to that kit and be willing to not let the operational and production students have access to it. So the cost associated with those kind of skills is much higher. And I wonder whether that's currently a big challenge for us, because certainly talking to some of the academic institutions, what I found is that they have these fantastic editing systems, but they're locked up behind closed doors, and they're used operationally by the operations students, but the engineers can't go near them. They're not allowed to understand how to do how to break the RAID if it goes wrong, or to configure workspaces, or how to configure network sharing, all those kind of things that, the modern engineer needs to be able to do. There's not the budget or the trust to allow them to fiddle with that kind of kit.
Yeah, I think it has to be taken offline, obviously, but I think we're very keen to get equipment into places. And often if I work with the Manchester universities, we'll take kit in and we'll actually start taking it apart. So that it isn't just seen as a black box with an input and an output. We will pull the top off it, show where engineers' test points are, that type of thing. And to give them that sort of mechanical curiosity that they need. If I take it apart, can I put it back together again? It's the old sort of Meccano convention of things, which sounds, again, very old-fashioned. But unfortunately, you're talking about this large percentage of older engineers that are going to disappear. The older engineers have built their skills on this sort of build it, take it apart, rebuild it, what happens if I do this to it? And you need that space for a young engineer to be able to do it. At Blackmagic Design, we actually have an engineering workshop which we use as part of our technical support. So if there is an online problem comes in from a guy in the field, we can recreate it in the workshop. We can take the things apart. We can see if a device is dropping frames for a particular reason. We can see if a camera has got a particular problem with it. We can see if a hard drive isn't working properly. And we try and recreate those faults so that we then can feed these back to our design team as bug reports or whatever it happens to be. So having that ability to have hands-on play, which isn't online, is really important, I think.
So, Steve, the manufacturers have been slated rather for not doing enough. What's your answer?
That's a really interesting point. I think our members, certainly, and we represent over 300 members worldwide, have now recognised there is a disconnect between academia, sorry to use the term, but academia and our membership, certainly. And now we at the IABM have recognised that, and this year we're forming an association of relevant universities. And I'd just like to expand on that a little. I probably get 2 or 3 emails every month from a university saying, oh, you must come along and look at our broadcast engineering course. I'll go and visit them, and what I actually see is a media studies course. Now certainly there are places for a media studies course, but some institutions are delivering broadcast engineering courses that aren't broadcast engineering. They may have been once upon a time, but the content has been diluted over the years, and now the engineering content is really, really small.
I think that's very, very true. We've seen physics departments disappear from universities rapidly. What we often find is that some students that would approach us would have been better suited on an art and design course, but maybe because of being able to get numbers into certain courses, students who don't necessarily go to an art and design production course end up on an engineering course and may do some computer graphics or something like this. But when it comes down to hard engineering terms, they're not really as strong as they should be. So it's important that if it's an engineering-based course, I think it should be science-based, it should be based from physics and maths, from electrical and electronic engineering.
Okay, now I know that people want to ask some questions, so can I ask, have we got any mics and anyone to give the mics out? And anyone got a question? Gentleman here.
Hi there, Martin Harries from University of the West of England in Bristol. We're all preaching to the converted here, obviously, because we're all here of like mind, what we're trying to create. I'm ex-BBC of 30 years and the same sort of vintage. Aren't we targeting the wrong people? Shouldn't we be targeting some of the production teams to be willing to take supernumerary in the craft staff areas? Now, obviously there's some funding problems with that, but the universities will have some money to put towards this. So seeking partnerships with the universities and production teams on certain productions to look at increasing numbers on the studio floor slightly by having supernumeraries, because that's the only way that training can be effective, rather than having somebody who actually is in a role.
Yeah, okay.
I go back
Mike.
to what I sort of said before. No one is, your point is absolutely valid, of course, but no one is interested. It's a risk. Television now, because it's no longer companies where that could be a comfortable situation, it's now you bring in a freelance camera crew, it's into a freelance studio, being looked after by a freelance production company, everybody with their bottom line at stake, with a time that they must finish in the studio. And sadly, your very good suggestion is not workable. It would also mean, just on a purely practical and personal side, people like Chris and I, who are the wrong side of 50 and still active cameramen, you cannot operate a camera on that day where you're being paid a lot of money and look after somebody who stood next to you. The two just don't mix, sadly. Having said that, the cameracrew.tv currently have 2 interns, to use the dreadful American phrase, and I have offered them a 6-month period with us. They're 4 months into it now. They're 2 guys who are in their early 20s. One is 18, one is in his early 20s. And they are doing superbly. They have learnt so much. They are potential very good cameramen. And they're learning from the best. They're working with people like Chris and many of the other cameramen that are on my books. And they will end up being absolutely superb cameramen. But that's a rare opportunity, and we have to kind of beg and scrape, and even the health and safety issues now. We're getting an 18-year-old who's starry-eyed into a studio. It's really complicated. In the old days, you used to maybe speak to the floor manager and go, listen, I've got, Joe Blogg's coming in today, he's really keen and whatever. Now you have to go to the production manager, there has to be a special insurance drawn up. Even, if you're working with a personality, that personality has to be warned that person who sort of constantly seems to be not quite knowing where he is and not quite in the right place at the right time is actually a student. It goes to many, many different levels now. And sadly, I wish it was the case that we could do that. We're keen to do it. We really want to impart our knowledge. And I'm the wrong side of 50 and just desperate to see young people coming in, really, really keen. And I have to say that I don't see a lot of people coming in. I mean, we've been going 6 years, we have a high web presence, we have a big presence. We were the crew, the Westminster Abbey crew for the royal wedding, all from the cameracrew.tv. We formed a major part of the crew on the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics. Having said that, and having had that kind of presence, I get no calls whatsoever from any educational institution, college, media course whatsoever. Not one to go, Mike, can we work together? Is there anything we can do?
Isn't it the case, though, that a lot of young camera operators, they are, some of them, they're being asked to, say, do dispatches, and they do everything. And they're not in the studio, they're going out and doing all that. So they're learning all that, how to be multitask and do everything. And they are the producer, the director, and the camera operator. And there's a lot of that going on. And in news, there's a lot of basic stuff going on. But it's the other stuff, the more the studio stuff, and that requires more professional skills. That is the problem.
Well, you have to get slightly focused as you work higher up. You suddenly realise that you've got to make a choice as to what area of camera work you're going to go into. The Sky philosophy of the multi-operator, I slightly take to task. I understand it fits with their business plan. Going forward, how that person would actually go out into the bigger, wider world and operate, I don't really know, because the bigger, wider world wants specific skills. They want to know that you are specifically trained in that area. And productions,
Sky is very much
productions
going down
are forcing you
that
to get
route,
narrower and narrower with your choices.
I mean, Sky's just abolishing its, after the election, they're going to change all the newsroom roles, and lots of people have been asked to reapply for their roles as reporters and producers, and they're abolishing the term head of cameras.
Right.
I happen to know. Sources worldwide.
I can understand that, and I can fully see that works for how that works outside. I don't really know, because productions will be very specific about what they require from a cameraman, whether they're on a music program or a drama, or whether it's film or whether it's video, and it just gets narrower and narrower, and people have to be more and more focused with what they're doing.
Get another question, just to let people. Yep, at the back there.
You're saying that there's nobody left in broadcast that has the long-term interest of broadcast, sort of, and yeah, I kind of get that. And yet, you could say the same thing about film over the last 50 years. And on the credits of every feature film, you will see trainees after trainees after trainees in almost all departments. Is it time for broadcasters to be paying a training levy and be forced to take on trainees?
Yeah, absolutely. I applaud that, absolutely.
How would that go with BT?
It's really interesting. I was talking to Darren before the event, and one of the ideas I had, I said we're still very new, but one of the beliefs I have is that I think that as broadcasters, if you like, at the top of the production chain in TV, I think we have a responsibility collectively to look at how we set standards in training and skills and push that back down through all the supply chain. In fact, I did an interesting exercise just after Graham came to see me. I sat in front of a flip chart and I drew out the relationship between all the stakeholders, many of whom are represented here. So broadcasters at the top, the supply chain, like the camera agencies, all the way through to post-production. I was trying to work out, what are the commercial relationships and what are the quality relationships, and who should be responsible where, and how does the money flow to make that happen. And I'm not saying what the answers, I haven't, but I think there's definitely a big question there. One of the things I'd like to do is go back and challenge the DPP, which I sit on, who represent all the broadcasters, to revisit our responsibility as DPP for setting some benchmarks around skill levels and therefore training that goes with that. But one thing I wanted to make if I can, just an interesting thing, there's a very real world of commercial pressure, not only at the top in broadcasters and the whole supply chain, but all the way through to the poor students who now are facing a very difficult commercial environment. And we had just one little anecdote. We had a student who came in as a runner from an institution close to where we are, who was very interested in being an engineer. And it was quite unusual to find a female engineer. I'm not saying we picked her out because of gender at all, but she was really, really interested to follow an engineering path. Wasn't quite on an engineering pathway, but was so interested that I said if she was that keen, she would be very welcome to come and spend time with our engineers. We had a really excellent female engineer in our department who was willing to mentor her, give her some really good time, and if she was really seriously interested, we would invest in that time for her. She came once. She never made it back again because unfortunately she was offered minimum wage work with shopping channels who could feed her their needs. So she chose a short-term option to get some basic minimum wage entry cash to fund where she was at that point in her life over the opportunity to get a really rich skill set and some really excellent mentoring. So I think we need to also think about that challenge, because I was very surprised and a little bit disappointed, but that's the commercial reality that a lot of students face.
Can I just say I totally agree with that sort of thing. But it's going to need a massive sea change within the broadcast industry, especially at the top level, because it wasn't that long ago that the BBC decided to back away from its training and its whole view outlook. It's become very specific, and it's turned everything into a freelance market, and basically saying let the freelance market take control and sort itself out. That's a very short-term, 5-year plan, very BBC sort of view of it. If you look further ahead, we are actually starting to see what the freelance market is going to be like. It's going to get slightly older and older and older, and eventually there will be, I think, a bit of a skills gap. If we don't find a way of passing on the skills that we've got, they will just disappear. It will then require production companies to come up with a new way of making programs, and I don't necessarily believe that will be better.
Okay. Yeah. One final question. So I've got lots here. There, next to the, yeah.
Is that me with the microphone?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you say who you are?
Oh, sorry, my name's John Barlow. I'm a boring old fart that, retired some years
TMI,
ago, but tried to maintain an interest in the industry itself. A couple of points, if I may. First of all, I thought that the presentation from Darren of Pinewood was excellent. I wish you were here and taking questions with the panel itself. Big business can generate the budgets to actually provide those kind of services, and we should applaud that. Now, listening to what the panel are saying about the difficulties, there seems to be a range of solutions. Certainly, long term, if you could get the broadcasters, the programme makers, to have to allocate, say, 1.5–2% of their budget into training, wouldn't that be wonderful? But that's not going to happen. Let's be realistic. That's not on. So you come back to what I think every member of that panel has said, that there is a wealth of talent that's out there, but unfortunately it's getting older and older. Now, it seems to me that in this room today we have broadcasters, we have industry, and we have universities and colleges. Surely some of the people who, with all respect, Chris, are getting on a bit and may not want to work quite so flat out in the years to come, they have the talent and the skills and the experience, and that needs to be passed on to the people undergoing their formal training through colleges and universities. Now, the colleges and universities, I will presume... Is
there a question?
Well, it's more of a statement and a question.
Can we get to the question,
Yeah, I will
please?
do, I will do.
Because we're a bit short of time.
Yeah, I know, sorry about that. I said I was a boring what's it. But it does seem to me that we need to allow the universities, colleges, to access that pool of talent that's now over 45 years old. And an organisation like the ITTP surely can coordinate this. So my question is, how do the panel feel about an organisation which can tap into the various craft organisations, not just the camera craft, but across the whole spectrum? Why not have the ITTP going into those craft organisations, finding the talent that's prepared to go into the colleges and universities and use them?
Okay. Thanks. Just a final point. What do you think, starting with you, John, as to what is the most important thing that should change?
I think the universities need to contact the manufacturers or vice versa. There needs to be an indication of the skill set we require for our business to run. The manufacturer's business is slightly different to the production engineering side of things, but certainly from our point of view, from a support engineer's point of view, we do need a particular skill set, and we want students to come to us who have got energy and enthusiasm within that skill set. We're not seeing that energy and enthusiasm at the moment. I would love to see lots of energy and enthusiasm coming from electrical engineers, from electronic engineers, from lens physicists, anybody who would like to work from a support point of view. So I think it's about us providing the information and the universities working on that information to provide a student who is fit for purpose.
Okay, Mike.
I think, as has been said, I think there should be some legislation almost that studios and production companies are obliged to have some input into training, some interest in training, which they really, majority, do not have.
Well, as I pointed out at the start, the government's own figures show this is a vitally important industry. I mean, I know it covers a lot more, but it is a particularly important industry for the UK, isn't it? Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with what Mike said. There are so many issues and problems. I know every time I think about it, I sort of get so far down the road and then I have to sort of reset and come back. And I just think it's a very complex issue. And I don't really know I can't really, one major problem that I could sort of zero in on and say if we could solve that, we'd solve the whole thing.
Well, certainly the ITTP is trying to do that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I applaud what they're doing, and anything I can do to support that, I will.
Okay,
more than
Steve.
happy to do.
good quality training doesn't just happen. It costs a lot of money to produce. So organisations simply have to now be prepared to pay for training. It's not going to be given to you free anymore.
Okay, Andy, last word.
Well, I asked an interesting question before I came today. I emailed all of the managers within BT Sport and all of our partners who work with us in our building and asked them 4 questions. To the last 2 were linked, which were, when you're looking for applicants, do you look for a particular qualification or a particular, perhaps, university or college? Something. What is there something you look for as you expect them to be a candidate? And nobody said yes. Everyone said it's irrelevant. I don't even look at that. I'm going to look for character type, personality, are they inquisiting, that sort of thing. Because now their view was, and I was very surprised it was across everybody, I thought someone would say that, the view across every single manager was that actually they wouldn't no longer expect a particular course or qualification to be an indication of a threshold.
So their perception is that there is a mismatch between education and demand of the industry.
Yeah, and that was across 16 managers across both BT Sport and our suppliers.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And I think we should give them all a round of applause. And now we'll have our coffee break. And please be back in half an hour and for our next session.
Andy.